Welcome to The Explainer. Today we're tackling a really big question. Why has the Philippines, a country with so much potential, been left behind while its neighbors have just soared? We're going to break down a compelling argument that says the answer isn't about global markets or foreign powers, but about a story we've been telling ourselves for decades.
And this quote, man, it just gets right to the heart of it. The argument we're digging into is that for decades, Philippine economic policy has been shaped, maybe even haunted, by this one single idea that the outside world is dangerous, a kind of colonial wound that we have to keep closed at all costs.
Okay, so this is where things get really interesting. What if all the historical evidence actually points to the exact opposite conclusion? What if the problem was never about opening the door, but about what we failed to build inside our own house?
All right, so let's actually unpack the story we tell ourselves. It does start from a real place, right? A history of colonialism where trade was often just another word for exploitation. But the story then makes this huge leap, basically claiming that all foreign engagement is a trap, and that the only safe path forward is to build walls around the economy.
But here's the twist. The argument is that if you actually look at the key moments in Philippine history, a totally different and pretty surprising pattern shows up. Opening up the economy wasn't the problem. It was almost always the spark that got the engine running. So let's just walk through this for a second. Way back in 1834, when Spain opened Manila's ports, it kicked off this huge export boom in sugar and coffee, and it actually gave rise to a new Filipino commercial class. Then you jump to 1909. The Payne-Aldrich Act brings in free trade with the U.S. And what happens? Exports multiply. Again. And even after the war, the Bell Trade Act of 1946, as controversial as it was, kept those trade ties open. The pattern is pretty darn clear. When the doors opened, the economy grew. And this, right here, is the absolute core of the argument. The problem wasn't the open market, it was the weak foundation back home. During these boom times, the country just failed to tackle the really big internal issues, like land reform and economic dependency. So while all this wealth was pouring in, it got stuck at the top, captured by a few, instead of being used to build a stronger nation for everyone. To really see what was possible, all we have to do is look next door. Our neighbors faced the same global pressures, but their success stories, well, they reveal a completely different set of choices, highlighting the road the Philippines just didn't take. This table, it just lays out the fork in the road so clearly. While neighbors like Japan and South Korea were going through these painful but necessary reforms, breaking up old elites, totally redesigning their economies to compete globally, the Philippines kind of did the opposite. It protected the old structures and turned inward. Just think about this contrast for a second. In 1853, when U.S. warships literally forced Japan's ports open, the Japanese elite saw it as a massive wake-up call. They launched the Meiji Restoration and fundamentally changed their entire society so they could compete on the world stage. The Philippines, on the other hand, when faced with its own moments of opening, largely used them to double down on the old system, making the elite even more powerful. And the results? Well, they're just staggering. It's not even close. After Japan opened up and reformed, its trade grew tenfold in just over 30 years. More recently, you look at Vietnam. Their reforms in the 80s led to their trade increasing sixfold as a share of their economy in just 16 years. And that boom lifted tens of millions of people out of poverty. Or take South Korea's economic miracle, right? We all think of giants like Samsung. But the critical first step, the foundation for all of it, was actually the 1949 Farmland Reform Act. By breaking the power of the old landlord class and giving land to the people who actually worked it, they created a society where millions could participate in and benefit from the massive export boom that was coming.
And this brings us to a really blunt, maybe even provocative question. When you see how countries like Japan, South Korea, and Vietnam, nations that, let's be honest, often started with way less, achieved so much, you have to ask, what was the Philippines' excuse?
Okay, so we've established that opening the economy probably wasn't the boogeyman. And we've seen how our neighbors use that same openness to fuel incredible prosperity through reform. So what is the real barrier holding the Philippines back? The argument here is that the barrier isn't out there. It was built from the inside. And that internal barrier has a name: rent-seeking. Let me break it down for you. Instead of working hard to build a better mousetrap to earn money, you just bribe a politician to ban all the other mousetraps. You get rich without creating anything new or better for anyone else. It's about rigging the game, not winning it fairly. And look, this isn't some fringe theory. Researchers have been pointing to this for years, identifying the core problem as this oligarchy of powerful families and political dynasties that basically control the economy. For them, a closed, uncompetitive system is great for business. Real change? Well, that's a direct threat to their bottom line.
And just look at this. Look at how concentrated that control really is. The World Bank has literally described the Philippines as having the most concentrated economy in all of Asia. A massive slice of vital industries, we're talking power, shipping, telecoms, is in the hands of a very, very small group of family-run conglomerates.
Okay, I want you to let this number sink in for a second. The source points to a calculation showing that in 2016, the increase in wealth of just the 50 richest Filipinos accounted for a staggering 24%, nearly 1/4 of the entire country's GDP growth for that year. I mean, that just shows you exactly where the gains are going.
And this isn't just about numbers on a spreadsheet. This system has real everyday costs for ordinary Filipinos. It means you're paying some of the highest electricity prices in the whole region. It means our farms can't produce enough because the big issues never get fixed. And ultimately, it means the ladder of opportunity is just so much shorter and harder to climb here than it is in neighboring countries.
All right, so after that pretty grim diagnosis of a captured economy, where do we go from here? What's the cure? Well, the argument we're exploring doesn't just stop at the problem. It proposes a path forward.
Now, this is maybe the most important takeaway of the whole thing. The argument is not that simply signing a trade deal is some magic pill that will solve everything. No. Instead, openness and foreign competition are the levers. They are the external pressure you need to force those really difficult but absolutely essential internal reforms that the powerful insiders would otherwise block forever.
So the argument doesn't just end with a vague hope, it lays out a blueprint for change. First, demand full transparency on which sectors are protected and, more importantly, who is actually benefiting from it. Second, make land reform a non-negotiable part of any new trade policy. Third, enforce a real competition law that actually has teeth and can break up monopolies. And finally, benchmark our progress against the countries that have already proven this model works.
And that brings us to this final, really powerful idea. The real debate isn't about the dangers hiding outside the door. It's about looking in the mirror and asking a much, much harder question. Are we, as a nation, willing to finally fix the internal structures that have held us back for generations? The argument we've explored today is that the choice and the responsibility has always been right here at home.